Without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker, the very Reverend Professor Martyn Percy, Dean of Christ Church, formerly Principal of Ripon College, Cuddesdon, talking on the woman with no name from a Lenten perspective. Thank you, Martyn.
Good evening, everybody. Really good to see you. Lovely to be here, and thank you very much to Julian for this invitation, and indeed to all of you. As advertised, I'm going to speak on the women with no name in relation to Lent, and particularly in relation to themes of Holy Week and Easter. So I hope that seems okay. You've got a handout, but I have to say it's usually my style with these kinds of things. Not to use a text to talk from, but to be relatively discursive, with my tongue firmly in my cheek, sometimes poking through the cheek, halfway through really. So you're going to find the sort of content of this talk will be a mixture of wry observation, humour, and as they sometimes say after 9 o'clock on BBC Two, themes of an adult nature that some viewers may find offensive. I don't know about you, but I always think to myself, oh good, I'm going to watch that one really. And then after about 45 minutes you think, what, I've been waiting all the time for that, and that's it. I have to say, you might not be so disappointed this evening, because we are going to talk about some quite serious adult stuff. And I hope that's okay. I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm what I call a busker when it comes to the Bible. That doesn't mean I sort of sit on the streets and make it up on, as I go along. But I do happen to think that the scriptures contain an enormous amount of interesting material which is not usually excavated in your average Sunday sermon. I mean, no disrespect, but it doesn't usually come out at this point. So what I want to do is I want to give you something of the kind of tang and the sense of Scripture being quite subversive, quite dangerous actually, when you start to really look at it. And I want to do that in relation to what I think is going on in the Holy Week, Good Friday, and ultimately the Easter stories. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Yes. I mean, tough if it doesn't. Because that's what you get. So, I could do something else, but that would be as advertised, really. So, let me begin at the beginning, and just an observation here. Very few people that Jesus heals have a name. I mean, they have a name, but we don't really learn it. And that in itself tells you that the vast majority of people that Jesus is healing are unknown. They have very little social status. They have no religious or moral status. They are, as it were, off the radar. They're so unremarkable that Matthew, Mark, Luke and John don't record their names. We hear about Lazarus, Bartimaeus, those two people who are healed, I suppose, Mary Magdalene. But otherwise, you're left with dozens, I mean dozens of people who are healed by Jesus who don't have any name at all. Oh, shall I turn this on? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, it is on.
Doesn't sound like it is.
Is now?
Yes.
Okay. So that's in itself, I think, quite a remarkable thing, really. And when you start to look at the Gospels in detail, you discover that actually Jesus is spending an awful lot of time with people who are on the margins. And that includes a very high percentage of women, either of Jewish repute, or who are demonised, or stigmatised, or ostracised, but who don't actually have any status. Jesus very rarely heals anybody in a religious building. On only 4 occasions does he do that. Everything else is done, as it were, on the street. And the times when he does heal in a religious building, it's women whose right to be there is in some sense questionable. It shouldn't really be there at all. So there's something going on in these healings. when you start to look at Jesus is contact with people. Sometimes when I'm remarking on this, I talk about Jesus being the body language of God. It's quite an interesting phrase, isn't it? Jesus is the body language of God. He feels the unfelt. He sees the unseen. He hears the unheard. This is a body that is richly sensate. And it's not just sensate in the sense that it's actually feeling, as it were, these people around him who are feeling really unhelped, unloved, uncared for. It's a sensate body that's drawing into itself impurity, taint, taboo, and many other things that witnesses to Jesus would say, well, if you were a good rabbi and a decent bloke and a moral and upstanding citizen, you'd give these people, or these women, a wide berth. But he doesn't. He touches them. He holds them. He commends them for their faith. He does extraordinary things with these women. And of course that is greatly to the annoyance and frustration, and indeed the hatred of the religious figures of his day. You could quite genuinely say, as you begin your journey in Lent, if you want to know what Lent is about politically, it's not about keeping yourself to yourself and being good. It's about actually engaging, sometimes, with these very politically delicate and socially delicate situations in which we're reaching out to the stigmatised, the ostracised, the demonised, the hated, the vilified, and not just making contact with them out of a point of charity, but making contact out with them to actually say that they're loved. They're already loved by God. It's not that they're in a position where they're not loved by God, and if they're really good and they do an alpha course and sit a confirmation course and do other things and join the stewardship scheme and agree to do the coffee rota and mow the church lawn, they might be saved. No, they're already loved, and loved just as much as you and I. So the gospel is, in the end, a testimony to the overwhelming abundance of God. Something that actually is poured out on the undeserving, so it seems. So that's what I want to talk about, and I'm going to do this by talking about a small range of women who have no name. I'm just going to chat you through the scriptures on those, and that's what it'll be. It'll be more of a kind of chat. Think kind of theologian meets Alan Partridge, but take the humour out. I won't do any ahas or anything like that. But that'll be kind of where we're going with this, really. So I'm going to start with the woman caught in adultery, who, guess what, we don't learn her name. But there's a lovely poem by a man called Andrew Rudging, modern poet, who talks about Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. But it's a poem that contains a joke. I won't give you the poem, but I'll give you the joke. So it goes like this, that Jesus walks into town one day and sees this enormous crowd, and sees in the centre of this crowd this woman hemmed against a wall, and everybody around with stones, bricks, and other things ready to throw. The woman is quaking, she is quivering. So he walks into the centre of this kind of crowd, much as I am now, turns to the crowd and says, "Right, you who are without sin may cast the first stone." And you can see people's faces just absolutely crestfallen. You know, they come out in the afternoon for a really good stoning. You know, it was an easy job. A woman caught in adultery, no problem. And everybody thinks, typical Jesus, you know, once again, the party pooper, you know, turning over the tables in the temples and papers, really. So, people at the front begin to drop their stones, and then suddenly, from the back of the crowd, comes this enormous brick, okay? Sailing over everybody's head. It's an absolutely perfect strike, hits the woman on the head, knocks her to the ground, out cold, bang, gone. And Jesus looks very cross, turns to the crowd and says, "Okay, who threw that? Who threw that brick?" Nobody moves a muscle. And then he sees a little face at the back that he recognises, and he says, "Oh, mother, Please, go ahead. Who was without sin when they cast the first stone? So, here's another story about an unnamed woman. And this story is from the Gospel of Luke. And it's the woman who bursts in, unwanted, into the house of Simon the Pharisee. Now, Pharisees are, generally speaking, good people, moral, upright. Jesus has been invited to dinner. He's a person of interest, and there he is. And if you remember the story from Luke 7, the woman walks in and makes the most unseemly spectacle of herself. She stoops down at Jesus' feet. She anoints his feet with tears and perfume. And then she does something extraordinarily sensual. She dries his feet with her hair. You can imagine that. Because, well, what else to use with? Now, you know, however you configure that, you just have to imagine what it's like for the onlookers. First of all, you need to understand something about custom here. That actually, the ritual bathing of people's feet coming into dinner was a relatively standard practice. And people wouldn't sit on chairs as you're sitting. They'd sit on the floor, on cushions. So in fact, the feet would be relatively easy to get to. So we're not talking about somebody, as it were, crouching below the dining room table here. The table, if it's even there at all, is an incredibly low coffee table. That's all it will be. And you'd be seated on the ground, probably slightly kneeling or reclining. Your feet would be slightly exposed, and they'd be washed because it's dusty, it's dirty, it's muddy, you know, there aren't pavements, there aren't roads. And so this action is something that is done to all guests. Simon, who is a Pharisee, has not arranged this for Jesus. That's the first thing to note about the story. Which tells you something quite interesting about Simon. That Jesus is intellectually curious. You know, he's an intellectual curiosity. He's somebody that might be interesting for his guests to engage with. Maybe it's a little bit like an Oxford high table, or a bit like an episode of Morse or something like that. You know, here's somebody that we can invite, and I've got a few fellows here, got some questions for you, Jesus. You know, I've got a fellow in astrophysics here, I've got this other bloke who's interested in sociology, I've got the new young woman lecturer who's also interested in science, and we're going to just grill you a bit while you dip into the hummus, really. So they're not really bothered with him, actually. He's just there. He's kind of sort of, intellectual bait, really. And the woman comes in and says what? Nothing. She says nothing. She walks in and she's got long hair. Long hair, of course, is a code. It's a code for a woman of ill repute, almost certainly some kind of prostitute or somebody on the street. And she just weeps. She weeps. And she weeps over him. And she anoints him. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that you get somebody who is really, in theory, rude, behaving in a very civilised way as she anoints his feet. And you can imagine the reaction from the crowd. I mean, the onlookers. What's a woman like that doing here, in this nice place? Doing that to his feet. If he had any sense, any discernment, any wisdom, then, in fact, he would push her away. Because is he not supposed to be a good rabbi? And therefore, he should know how to behave. He should push her away or get somebody else to do it, but he doesn't. But it seems to me that Luke is doing something rather clever with this story. He's actually portraying this woman as an icon of God. He's giving her something that the rest of the feast doesn't. He's saying something about the way in which Jesus is just sometimes mirrored in the activity of what else is going on. So, icon of God, how's that? Well, like this. Like God, the woman takes the initiative and comes from the outside. It's not that she's been invited in, that's the point. She's just come. She's turned up. Uninvited, she comes in. And God is like that. Not everything that God does in your life is something that you asked for, or something that you invited God to do. Sometimes God just breaks in. And actually, it's a bit disruptive. It's a bit unwelcome. It's not something you expected. But God takes the initiative because actually God does not need your permission to break into your life. Have you noticed that? It's also God the seeker. God finds. And this woman finds Jesus. He's been lost in this feast. I would say too, as well, secondly, this woman is like Jesus. She takes the form of a slave, of a servant. Christ Jesus, though being found in the form of God, did not cling to equality with God, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and being found in human form, humbled himself, and became obedient unto death, even death on a cross, says Paul in Philippians 2. What is this woman doing? She's actually making herself into a servant. And you've got echoes here of the foot washing too in John 13. This is exactly what Jesus will commend his disciples to do as well. Strip off, put a towel on, stoop, wash, and so forth. And thirdly, this woman is like the Holy Spirit. She literally pours herself out, pouring out of tears, the anointing, the perfume, the whole thing. She settles on him. She broods over him in much the way that the Spirit broods over the water. This is loving, sensual attention, actually. And it's profoundly uncomfortable for the witnesses to watch, because none of them would love or caress or touch Jesus like this. Now, I think Luke places this story just before you get to chapter 9, because we've already been given a little hint of what is to come in the rest of Luke's Gospel. To bear in mind that Luke's passion narrative begins very early in chapter 9, when Jesus sets his face towards Jerusalem. After that, he never looks back. But that's in chapter 9. And you've got another 24, well, you've got until chapter 24 to get to the end. But here, in chapter 7, you've got a sense of a message already being sent. This is my beloved, my chosen. This woman will do something extraordinary. So the whole thing is what I would sometimes term a Christophany. That is to say, this woman represents Christ to himself. She takes the initiative, she humbles herself, she pours herself out, and everybody else looks and tucks. So, the Gospels are full of surprising ways of reading what's going on with some of these women and the way that they interact with Jesus, and what the story of salvation ultimately is when you actually begin to look at it in real depth. And that story, it seems to me, settles on this whole business of this woman being quite Trinitarian, taking the initiative, humbling herself, and pouring herself out, just as you would expect God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit to do, all wrapped up in a woman of dubious repute. Now, why does that matter? It matters because the Gospels are constantly confounding us. If the Gospels make you comfortable, you haven't read them properly. If the Gospels don't make us question where we are, then something's not quite right with the way that we're reading them. Conveniently, of course, coming from Oxford, I've brought a handout, okay? Presumably for printing this, you'll see here that, just for sheer convenience, I've listed lots of types of people that Jesus heals. The reason I've done this is because, and here I'm going to make a sort of mild political confession, is that 25 years ago now, thereabouts, I wrote a very short article for one of those sort of obscure theological journals on healing miracles. And it was one of those things that was kind of written almost on the back of an envelope, really. And what I said in the article was that if you read these stories in the Gospels, it wasn't a particularly interesting question to ask, did it or did it not happen? I'm not really very interested in that question. I do, by the way, think it did happen, but that doesn't make for a very long article, as I'm sure you appreciate. What I said was, I think if you start to pay attention to who Jesus healed, you start to actually get somewhere with what this whole gospel business is about. And indeed, what our own salvation story might be about. And I started to run through the categories. I pointed out that he healed the demonised, the handicapped, lepers, children, widows, people with little social status, women who were deemed to be unclean, on a number of occasions, people of other faiths. And that when you start to look at this, you begin to think, well, hang on a minute. No one here is becoming a Christian. No one is told at the end of their healing, right, now off you go to confirmation class, otherwise the vicar will be cross. None of these things. These people are just healed. They're given their grace. They're restored to life. 10 lepers are healed. 1 gives thanks. 9 get it. Anyone. You know, that's fine. No one's complaining about that. So, these are extraordinary records of God's reckless grace and abundant love. To the unnamed, we just literally don't know who they are. Jesus hardly ever heals his friends, and certainly not relatives. I think on only one occasion does Jesus heal Peter's mother-in-law. Of course, you can argue that mother-in-laws are inherently demonised and marginalised, but I couldn't possibly comment. Jesus doesn't heal elders, scribes, Pharisees. He doesn't heal disciples. Now, I don't know about you, but before I get into the rest of this handout, I'm willing to bet, this is a wager for you, that just as you've probably got your top 5 or 10 top sermons somewhere in your head, the ones you really remember, I bet you've got your bottom 10 as well, haven't you? You're all very worried about this. But I know you do. I've got a couple of confessions here. I once went to a wedding with a friend, and my boys were very young, and we had them both with us, really, and it was in a sort of London church, really. And the sermon was so just absolutely appalling. I thought, I can't stand any more of this. We were only kind of 3 minutes into it, really. My eldest son, Ben, was quite young at the time, so I thought, I've got to get out, because I can't bear this any longer. You know, it was patronising, it was wrong, it was just everything about it was going. And so I looked at Emma, my wife, and you know, she raised her eyebrows, and you know, I said, oh, you know, and she was digging her fingernails into me because there was no pew to actually scratch and this kind of thing. So I thought, right, I've got to take evasive action here. So I pinched my son, and at which point he started to cry, and of course I just looked at everybody and I thought, take it out. Come on. It shows initiative. And you would have done it if you'd had a child that age. Yeah. Anyway, but I do remember a more humorous example of this when I was much younger, in my teens, and I'd gone kind of youth hosteling with some friends. We were down in Wales. We thought for a lark we'd go to the Parish church, which was in the middle of nowhere, I can't even remember where it was now, for their service. And we had been youth hosteling, and we were just sitting there waiting for our Welsh BCP to, you know, rock up. And all of a sudden, with about 5 minutes to go, this entire pack of brownies descended upon the church from the nearby campsite. And you could see the clergy getting very, very worried at this point. Because, when you've got, as it were, a little BCP homily prepared, and you're suddenly invaded by 40 brownies, you kind of need to rethink, don't you? Yeah. So you could see the kind of clergy, the anxious sort of whispering and muttering in the vestry. Anyway, these two clergy emerged, and there was obviously some improvised child's talk about to take place, really. So we thought, okay, we're up for this. We'll see what it goes. Anyway, the talk hinged on an anagram of God is love, which is I love dogs. So it's not the most subtle sermon. So the clergyman started talking about his dog and the fact that I love dogs was very good. He's trying to engage the brownies at this point. Do you have a dog? Yes, I have a dog. What's your dog's name? Fido. But anyway, after about 30 seconds of this, Brownie 1 started to cry. And I don't know if you've ever been with a pack of brownies, but tears can be very contagious. And then Brownie 2 started to weep, and Brownie 3, and Brown Owl was just kind of on a sort of shuttle mission by now. All of these brownies were being taken out. But anyway, within about 5 minutes, the church was empty. And this poor chap was left talking about dogs because the brownies were just missing all their dogs. And they just descended into weeping about the dogs. And so the whole thing just disintegrated, really. Now, my reason for mentioning dogs is I want to talk a little bit about the Syro-Phoenician woman. Now, she's sometimes called the Canaanite woman or the Canaanite daughter. That's the healing story. And again, you find that in Luke. And you may remember you've got this curious phrase that goes on where Jesus says to the woman, "It's not good to give bread to dogs, is it?" Which actually sounds pretty insulting, doesn't it? Why are you calling this woman a dog? What's that about? And the woman replies, "Yeah, okay, but even the dogs get the crumbs under the table, don't they?" She says. She's smart. And Jesus says, "No. Your faith has made your daughter well. Go in peace." Now, a little domestic note here. If you've had children, you'll know that dogs are very handy because they basically spend about 2 or 3 years living under the high chair, eating the cast-off fish fingers and the various other things that come out of either the tray or the orifices that your children have. For the dog, it's just an extra source of nutrition, really. What's the status of dogs? What's going on in that story? Well, it's a subtle thing, actually, because this woman, bear in mind, is a Canaanite. She's Syro-Phoenician. So she's a Gentile. Where does this miracle take place? Actually, in Gentile territory. Jesus, once again, our friendly, itinerant boundary crosser, doesn't spend all his time, actually, on Jewish territory. He feeds 5,000 in Jewish territory and 4,000 in Gentile territory. 2 different miracles, 2 different audiences. So this healing is really interesting because actually it's to the Syro-Phoenician or to a Canaanite woman who Jesus initially brands as a dog. But why? And the answer is, of course, this is witnessed by the disciples, and of course dogs in Jewish homes are non-kosher. They are not welcome. They're pests. They will be kept out. But in Gentile territory, they're a good thing. That's one reason. The second reason is this. That dog is a code. A code for mongrel. Code for mixed race, mixed religion, mixed weave. I don't know how many of you recently been watching Crufts. You see you've watched them? You know, the papillon one, you get all these lovely kind of preening sort of glorious breeds. But don't forget, modern dog breeding is modern. There are no thoroughbreds in Jesus' time. There's no pedigree. Dogs are dogs. and they eat what they can eat. They're scavengers, but they're also pets in other places. But what's going on with this reference to dog is this, that Jesus recognises that this woman's status as a Canaanite, as a Syro-Phoenician, is that her religion and her race is mixed. She's regarded by pedigree Pharisees, pedigree Sadducees, pedigree Jews as a mongrel. They look down on her. She is to them a dog. And in fact, the worst kind of dog, because she's a new dog. Because the Canaanite or the Syro-Phoenician religion is the worst of all worlds. It's an old religion mixed in with the new. She's a bad mongrel. So again, if Jesus was doing his job as a good Jew, he would send her away. And isn't that not what the disciples say? Jesus crying afterwards, just get rid of her, get rid of her. But he doesn't. He heals her. What's the lesson in this for you and I? The lesson here is about hybridity, it's about purity, it's about race, it's about religion, it's about mix. It's also something for our own time as well. In an age where actually there's lots of stuff, even now, about ethnic cleansing, religious purity, national integrity. Here's a Jewish healer who's quite prepared to get involved in the mix and sees no problem at all, actually, with giving God's overwhelming abundance of grace, mercy and love to somebody who others regard as being the low par because they're mixed race, mixed religion, mongrel origin. And Jesus is always doing this kind of thing. My third example is directly on your handout, and this is the story from Luke 8. Let me just talk you through this for a minute. This is where we're going to get into the slightly more sensitive adult material. Okay. Now then, this is a really interesting story because it's what's called a synoptic parallel. You shouldn't worry too much about that as a phrase. It's just sort of posh theologians talking about the fact that this story occurs in the same form in Matthew, Mark and Luke. That's a synoptic parallel. But there you go. If you don't learn anything else this evening, you've learned about synoptic parallels. This is one of them. And the story is more or less the same, however you encounter it. Jesus is walking into town, and Jairus, who is what's called a synagogue ruler, sends servants to say to Jesus that his daughter is unwell and that he must come quickly in order to heal her. And Jesus makes his 180-degree turn, and in so doing is met by this throng of people, amongst whom one woman, unnamed, steps out from the crowd and touches the hem of his cloak and is instantaneously healed as a result of that contact. But Jesus, the Gospel writers tells us, notes that he's been touched in a way that's intentional rather than just a casual brush. Power has gone out of him. And so immediately launches a public inquiry. Much, of course, to the reasonableness of the disciples who say, everybody's touching you, we all want a piece of the pie. No. Somebody did this very, very deliberately. And the woman is drawn out of the crowd, is commended for her faith. She has her healing. And then, of course, Jairus' servants return and say, I shouldn't bother coming to the house anymore. She's pegged it. Too late. But Jesus goes, nonetheless, with a disciple or two upstairs, lays hands on the woman, on the girl, colours the kunai, and heals her. Now, what do we learn about this story? Well, first of all, we learn something about the power differentials that are going on in this kind of world. Whose name do we know? Jairus. That's all. I'm happy. And Jairus is a synagogue ruler. A synagogue ruler would be a little bit like a kind of cross between a verger and the senior church warden. If you can think about your kind of ecclesiastical bestiary, if you can imagine such a book. You know, these are intimidating beasts, really. Church warden, verger, you can imagine the cassock, can't you? And you can imagine the cattle prod or the warden or something like that. But actually they had a very serious purpose, actually. Their purpose was to keep the outer courtyards of the synagogues clean. By clean, I don't mean, as it were, picking up the litter. I mean ritually clean. Clean. Pure. That's their responsibility. The synagogue ruler. Not preaching, like a lay reader. The synagogue ruler is responsible for the ritual purity of the space. That's the job. So then, you know some things about this story. Even a casual English reading of this. The woman has been ill for 12 years. How old is the girl? 12. And then you start getting into the stuff that's just kind of tricky. The woman, the Gospel writers tell us, has had hemorrhages for 12 years. In other words, perpetual menstrual bleeding. She can't stop it. She can't. And the Gospel writers tell us she has spent all she has on trying to sort this out. To no avail. Why would that matter? It matters because she can't, in that state, do what? Go to the synagogue. Exactly. She can't. Because any reading of Leviticus or Deuteronomy will tell you that in that state, I'm afraid, you're out. You can't go. So this hurts her. So of course you spend your money. The girl, in contrast, of course, is 12, and she's about to start her first bleeding. So you could say that one way of reading this story is the woman has her girlhood returned, and the girl is enabled to enter into womanhood. And the story hinges, actually, on menstruation. It actually does. It hinges on that subject we never really talk about, certainly not in church, because we imagine that actually we moderns don't need to do it. Because we're just used to all of those lovely adverts you see on TV now, where, you know the kinds of things I mean. You start off with a little kind of jiggy tune and a little kind of voiceover and somebody in a soft voice saying, at this kind of time of the month it's all a bit tricky and, I don't feel myself really. Then, 2 seconds later you cut to a science lab with people in white coats, usually with cotton pads and blue fluid, because, this has got to look kind of right somehow, but not that right. And then there'll be a little thing that appears, in the corner telling you something about absorbency and buoyancy and goodness knows what else and that kind of thing. There'll be some kind of compare and contrast thing going on. We're 15 seconds into the ad now. Then we cut back to the woman, who by now, of course, has donned the most appropriate wear at that time of the month. She's in a pair of white lycra shorts. And she's on a skateboard, hurtling through Central Park before jumping out of an aeroplane to paraglide into somewhere else. Because, you don't really feel like gin and paracetamol at that time of the month. You feel absolutely at the top of your game. So much so that really all you can think about is, basically skateboarding through Central Park. And I know you all wear white lycra shorts, so there we go. Now, the thing about this is that we see these things all the time now, and it kind of passes by. But did you know that actually it's only relatively recent in our social history that those TV adverts could be shown before 9 o'clock? They were subject to a watershed. The ban on those in Northern Ireland was only lifted in 2004. Now you might think this is all quite normal, but this is really about education. This is about how we talk about these things in public life. It's about so much, really. And in actual fact, when you start to unpick this, you realise, of course, that around this is shame, taboo, conversation about how people talk. You know, I can remember, myself really from my own childhood about the euphemisms that people used to use to talk about this. And where this all went to. And if you think about your parents and your grandparents and the euphemisms that they had, it's even more opaque. So no doubt it's healthier now, but we're dealing with 2,000 years ago. And 2,000 years ago, taboo, blood, defilement, it's all there. The woman can't go to the synagogue, and the girl, if she's not raised, will, as it were, be dead. Don't forget, of course, that Jesus is, in this very short sequence of this story, locked into a double impurity. He's touched by a menstruating woman, and then he goes and touches a corpse. What does that tell you about what this body language of God is doing in Jesus? It's saying that this one, this incarnation, this body of Christ, is literally drawing up the taint and the taboo and the defilement and taking it into his body, as he does on the cross. The shame is absorbed, the defilement is absorbed. And he's hated, actually, for doing it. Because if he was good, he'd recognise that the way we do things in divine society is the right way to do it. Now, I think there's something else going on in this story as well. And I want to suggest to you that this is where it moves from being something that we can observe to being something that's a bit more inside us. The interesting thing about this story that appears in Luke 8 is what it does with time. What it does with time in relation to Jairus and to the woman. Now, I don't know about you, but when you're in a position of dependency or powerlessness, your time is no longer your own. You're committed to waiting, quite independent of what you hope will happen to you. The bishop is running late. He'll see you in half an hour. Just amuse yourself with parish magazines. What can you do? I mean, you can't just say, oh, sod it, I'll leave. The bishop's going to be half an hour late. Then, he can rebook an appointment with me. It doesn't work like that, usually. Thank you for coming to the consultation today. You'll get a letter from us in the next couple of weeks. Well, what can you see in those? Well, I can't really say at the moment. It's hard to tell what those shadows mean. We're going to take them away and have a look at them. We'll write to you. You'll get a letter in the next couple of weeks. Suddenly, you're in a position of total powerlessness. You're just waiting for the letter, aren't you? What's it going to say? What do those pains mean? What do those shadows infer? What did the doctor see? What did I see in the doctor's eyes that I might now see in a letter? And when the letter doesn't arrive after 2 weeks, what do you do? Well, I know what I'd do. I'd be thinking it's a fortnight and there's nothing in the post. What conclusions do I draw from that? Bad postal service, bad news, more tests, less life. What? Waiting is powerlessness. I would just say to you this. When you read this story, the woman has been waiting for 12 years. She's had to wait. Jairus is a person of power and has not had to wait for anything. What does Jesus make him do? Wait. Just a little bit. Wait. He doesn't get to Jairus immediately. I Jairus wanted. He does not come running. He stops and spends time with the woman who's had to wait. And the result of that is utterly catastrophic. Is it not? Because his daughter dies. She dies. So this waiting is awful. So I think this is a miracle that contains a moral. And the moral has got something to do with putting yourself in the position of other people who have far less power than you. Whoever you are, whatever you do, it's about attending to them and imagining what it's like to be in their shoes with less hope, less power, less money. The woman's got all of that. She's got no power, no money, no time. But this is an extraordinary story in that regard. Now, just in case you doubt any of this, I've brought some of these little pictures. You can just see them on the handout, really. They're interesting because the two that are on the bottom here, bottom left, are 3rd and 4th century. And if you look particularly at the bottom one, what the sculptor has done there is move the woman, that's, as it were, Jairus' wife, into a position of total pleading. So you can see the woman being raised, the girl being raised, but the woman, the wife, is on the floor virtually. In other positions here, the one above, which is as it were, an older sculpture, Jairus and his wife stand side by side. And if you flip to the back here, you'll see some of the other stuff that's actually going on. This is actually Jesus and the woman at the well. And just have a look at what's happening here. Top left, Jesus and the woman stand side by side, as actually the Gospel of John says they do. And that in itself is a shock, because like the Canaanite woman, Syrophoenician, the Samaritans, mixed race, mixed religion. So again, you shouldn't be talking to them because they're mongrels. But what does Jesus do? Talks to her face to face, stand to stand. But then again, when you start getting to the bottom here, can you see? We've got here this extraordinary kind of kitschy, sort of Victorian kind of thing. And the woman is kneeling at his feet, and Jesus is sitting in a position of authority. Don't forget, sitting is a position of teaching and power and authority. I'm standing to lecture, but actually a good rabbi like Jesus would have sat this evening and talked to you on a throne. Bishops really, strictly speaking, when they preach, should preach sitting down. The Gospels tell us Jesus sat down to teach, because it's a position of education and authority. So here we've got Jesus sitting on the well and the woman kneeling at his feet. But there you have it. So you can see what's going on here. There's a kind of sort of movement over time, which is pushing the women down, putting them in positions of subservience. And I just put it to you that one of the things that is going on in the Gospels time and time again is Jesus is actually raising everybody up and treating them equally. And in fact, more than that, is actually giving grace and abundant love and salvation to the seemingly undeserving. Now I'm nearly finished. I want to give you one more story, and then I want to offer you a poem that takes us into, I think, in some respects, not just the heart of Lent, but also the heart, really, of what Good Friday is all about. The story is about Chavara, who founded the Samaritans. Some of you may know this story. Chavara, when he was a curate, in those days, curates didn't live in 3-bedroom houses with a garage and a study. There was none of that kind of nonsense. Sorry, you know. But there would have been, several curates in one parish, and they had lodgings. They would have had landlords, and that would have been it really. And Vara was a curate in Lincoln City, and he cycled home one day, and he was met at the door by his landlady, who said, "You're to cycle up to the cemetery immediately, the vicar's unwell, and there's a funeral about to begin, and you're to conduct it." Now, of course, modern sensibilities here would panic at this point because, no funeral visit has been conducted, we don't know the name of the deceased, none of the above. But actually, it didn't matter so much in those days because basically it was just a book of common prayer, comfortable words, and it was a burial. So off Farmer goes, and he gets there, and the funeral procession is literally about to kick off. And so he gets to the front and he starts reading from the Book of Common Prayer, and the resurrection and the life, says the Lord, whosoever believes in him, in me should not perish but have eternal life. And they walk. And as they get to the gates, the funeral directors direct them to the right. And the funeral is conducted. And Laura says at the end, I have two questions. Firstly, why are we in unconsecrated ground? And secondly, this is quite a small coffin. What's going on? And the funeral director says, well, we're in unconsecrated ground because the girl hung herself. And the reason she hung herself was because she'd had her first period. She was so traumatised by that, she just took her life. That was it. Vara's response to that was to set up sex education in his parish. It's fair to say it was not a successful experiment. People were so appalled by this in the council estate that he was working in, they quite literally took up stones and threw them out. And he went to London, where one of the livery companies, the nurses' company, one of the wealthiest livery companies, gave him a phone line and a grant of £5. And that is the beginning of the Samaritans. The Samaritans has its origin in exactly that. So I just want us to be clear that even in our lifetime, these things matter. Taint, taboo, defilement. But the other thing I want to say about this is that the whole reason that Good Friday matters is because Jesus overcomes defilement and doesn't just conquer death. He takes on taboo and shame and demonisation and ostracisation. And you see that in the healings that he does. And you see it in the kinds of contact that he keeps and the company he keeps. It's difficult stuff. But fundamentally, this is about the body of Christ absorbing everything into itself and saying it's okay, it's going to be redeemed, it's going to be held, it's going to be saved. And the world that Christ inaugurates will not be a world that's separated between the clean and the unclean. It won't be a world which is separated between Jew and Gentile. It won't be a world that's separated between male and female, young and old, or remainers or leaders, for that matter, if you really want it. It's going to be incorporative, inclusive, and utterly and totally overwhelming. So here's the poem I promised you that I wanted to end with. This is by Harry Smart. I'm going to have to give you a quick confession about this. I did use this poem about a couple of months ago in a quite different context, in a different conference. And I entirely forgot that the talk was being signed for me. So you'll see immediately the problem as I read this poem, as to the problem that this presented to people who were doing the signing. It's Harry Smart's poem. It's called Praise, and it comes from a book called Fool's Path, which was published in 1995. It has themes of benevolent nature in it, as I promised earlier. Okay. Here it goes. Praise be to God, who pities wankers and has mercy on miserable bastards. Praise be to God, who pours out his blessing on reactionary warheads and racists, for he knows what he is doing. The healthy have no need of a doctor, the sinless have no need of forgiveness, but, you say, they don't deserve it. That is the point. That is the point. When you try to wade across the estuary at low tide, but misjudged the distance, the currents, the soft ground, and are caught by the flood in deep shtuk, then perhaps you will realise that God is to be praised for delivering dickheads from troubles they've made for themselves. Praise be to God who forgives sinners. Let him who is without sin throw the first headline. Let him who is without sin build the gallows, prepare the noose, say farewell to the convict or kiss. That's what Jesus overcame on Good Friday. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Martyn. That was really great teaching. Do we have any questions for Martyn?
Thank you very much. It was a very provoking talk. You used the phrase just now about the body of God absorbing itself.
Absorbing humanity, yes.
Exactly.
Yes,
And this week we celebrate 25 years of the first women priests in the church. And the title of your talk was The Women with No Name. So, in a way, it's kind of, with the way Jesus was with women, it's good that the church is actually acknowledging women's place. There's also a need to remember those women who came before the priests who were first ordained and how they have built towards the body that's now absorbing itself into humanity.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I mean, my wife was one of the first, was in that original kind of class of 25 years ago. We're powerfully aware of, in a sense, the history that's gone before that. I mean, one of my heroes is a woman called Maud Croydon, who was on the edges of, the suffragettes, but absolutely passionate about women's rights. Wanted to be ordained in the church, and couldn't be, so became a congregationalist minister, actually. So this has been going on a very long time. But I use the word incorporation very deliberately, because I think sometimes words like inclusive become very politicised, about inclusive church, as opposed, say, to exclusive church. I think, think differently about this. The body of Christ is the incarnation of God, yeah? And actually that body is actively incorporative. It's living and breathing in order to absorb the whole of humanity, including all those people mentioned in Harry Smart's poem. It's not just there for the healthy, it's there for, all of us, actually. Not just the Christians who regard themselves as honorary sinners, but everybody else, actually.
Any other questions? I'm sure there's a few more. Julie?
Thank you, Martyn. That was really challenging. I'm always taken by the way in which, when Jesus heals, there's sometimes a bit of a sting when he goes and says to the person, your faith has healed you, but then he says, go and sin no more. And it's the relationship between sin and healing that sometimes I find quite troubling. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I think there is, in some of the healings, there's an equation between how people are behaving and what they need to do, as it were, to continue to claim their new lease of life, if you like. But quite often that equation is questioned as well. And don't forget, of course, that in the sort of what I would term the social construction of reality in which Jesus is operating in his lifetime, most people would assume that their illness was somehow either their fault or the result of something that their parents done. The fathers have eaten sour grapes, the children's teeth are set on edge, is how Jeremiah expresses it. So there's something here about this being questioned by Jesus, but actually the vast majority of healings, I'll just give it away free. I mean, that's the shocking thing, it seems to me. But when you boil it down, you've got 10 lepers, only one gives thanks, but 9 get it anyway. we've got this very interesting, if you remember your sort of Sunday school maps of Palestine, and you track Jesus, you could do that, and you see where he's actually doing these healings. He's zigging in and out of Gentile territory all the time. You know, the reason I mentioned the 4,000 and 5,000 feedings is because there is a sense in which you get, you know, one miracle for the house of Israel, and then the same miracle for the rest of the world. You know, 7 baskets of leftover bread for the Gentiles, actually for the 7 Gentile regions that Jesus would have known, you know, Judea, Philistia, and so forth, really. So I think we're watching something that's very inclusive, very cooperative. You know, these healings are, in some ways, you know, very deliberate social and political acts, actually. You know, one of my favourites, which is not a physical healing, is Zacchaeus, also in Luke's Gospel. You know, Zacchaeus, a tax collector, small man, demonised, has to go to a tree to see Jesus. Jesus, you know, takes tea with him, in effect. But most people assume, most Bible commentaries assume that Zacchaeus is on the fiddle. But actually Luke doesn't say that. Luke nowhere says that Zacchaeus is dishonest. And even Zacchaeus is you know, like a good accountant, actually. He's pretty careful. He says, you know, if I've defrauded anybody, if, you know, that 2-letter word, if I've done it, then you can have 7-fold back. He's an accountant. He hasn't. Otherwise he wouldn't have promised it. That's the point. In other words, this is an honest man having to, as it were, hold an unpopular tax, for which he's hated and demonised and ostracised, totally and utterly. So of course he makes that promise, because actually, you know, fiddling is not a problem. So I think some of these things just require very careful reading between the lines and thinking, well, actually, what's going on here? So why does Jesus spend time with him? Well, actually, not because he's actually dishonest, but actually because he's demonised. That's the point.
I've got a question. I'm just wondering how Jesus' teaching, how radical was it? Or was it just that Israel and I suppose the teachers and people like that in the Old Testament had just moved away from what was correct teaching? So Jesus, for example, quotes Elijah. And Elijah actually was, and I think it's after he's spoken in the synagogue, Jesus, and then he said he didn't listen to Israel didn't listen to Elijah, and Elijah just healed somebody who was a non-Jew. And so how much of this is new teaching, and how much of this is just Jesus correcting Israel for going wrong?
Some of it's new, a lot of it's restorative. Elijah's a really interesting character, because, you know, Elijah too, you know, has to embrace, as it were, you know, an Arab boy to heal him. And again, you know, there's an act of defilement going on there, and he's ministered to as a result of that by this woman from Nain, in effect. You know, that's how he gets his food, really. So Elijah's learning that lesson that actually God's going to actually bless you from outside your tradition and give things to you. I mean, the parable of the Good Samaritan is a really good example of this. You know, there are no Good Samaritans in Jesus' day; they're all bad people. So the parable of the Good Samaritan is a hostile story, because any Judean listening to the story would say, well, hang on a minute, you know, they're all bad. So you tell a story about a Good Samaritan who's excessively good, abundantly good, and you immediately question people's tribalism, you know, their tendency towards demonising other people, their tendency to say, well, we all know what they're like, and that kind of thing. And, you know, we've all done this in our lives, to some extent. I mean, we don't do it these days now, but we've all grown up with, you know, jokes about Englishmen, Irishmen and Scotsmen, because, you know, we've been quite used to doing those kinds of stereotypes. And they don't work now for all the reasons you would expect them to, because national stereotypes are, you know, bordering at least on offensive, really. And I think there's something going on with what Jesus is doing, where he's actually calling the house of Israel back actually to the radical inclusiveness that's there in fact in the Old Testament as well. One of my favourite writers is an American theologian, now long dead, a man called Urban Holmes III. He couldn't make the name up, could he? I don't know why Americans have, numbers after their names, really, but anyway. But Urban Holmes, and Holmes in one of his books, quite a short book, says, in the end, religion boils down to this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, your neighbour as yourself. And then he says, the rest is tactics. And it's just a lovely way of just saying, actually, that's it. If you're loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength, and loving your neighbour as yourself, you're fulfilling the law, you're doing what God wants you to do. Do you think God is bothered about much else? I don't, actually. I think it's really about that. But I think it's so easy in institutions, societies, cultures, and churches to draw lines, build walls, create tribes, work out who's in, decide who's out, create hierarchies, and do all of these things, because we're human beings in the end, we're social animals, and we love hierarchies, and we love boundaries, and we love tribes, and therefore we very quickly decide who's not fitting in, and who's actually non-kosher, and who's actually not going to belong. But ultimately, the kingdom of God is an incredibly broad operation. And what actually Jesus is proclaiming in the kingdom of God is salvation for everybody, whether Jew, Greek, Gentile. It goes on and on and on. And that's why his ministry spends so much time in international territory. If it was just to the lost house of Israel, there'd be nothing for that Syrophoenician woman and her girl. But ultimately, he's there for them too. And that's the message, it seems to me, that actually this salvation, if it's worth anything, is for everybody, or it's not worth anything. And I think in the end, Lent, to me, in Good Friday, is about a reckoning with that cross being something that ultimately embraces the entire world. That's it.
Any more questions before we finish? No? Okay. I just have to make a few notices before I just sort of give a blessing. So let me just... there was a mistake, first of all, on the Lent lectures flyer which went around. So just to let you know that, some of you would have picked that flyer up when you were attending church services. Our last speaker in our Lent series, General Tim Cross, he is not the Royal Engineers, he is the Royal Logistics Corps. So that was my mistake, and in the army they get very fussy about that. So he is actually the Royal Logistics Corps, just to let you know. Let me just say the blessing. The Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, the Lord make his face shine upon you and give you his peace. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you this day and forever. Amen. Amen. Thank you, Martyn, very much.